Good evening to you all, and welcome to the June 27 work session of the Garner Town Council. This session's always a little different from regular business meetings, and so we don't have some of the preliminary items that we usually do, so we're going to jump right into the agenda. But I'll first of all ask the clerk, if she will, to call the roll. I'm present.
Here. Here. Here.
And it is noted that Councilmember Singleton has been in touch with us. He's had a busy day, and he's going to be a little bit late, so we anticipate that he'll be along before too long, and we'll be happy to have him here. So, but in the meantime, we will follow the agenda, and the first item, Council, before you is the adoption of the agenda. What say you?
So move.
Second.
Okay, motion made, properly seconded. If you favor adoption of the agenda, please vote aye.
Aye.
If there's any opposition, no. Excuse me, and then so ordered. Okay, I understand there are not any presentations tonight, so we'll go to item D, which is under discussion and reports, and we have two items there, both very important this evening. So I'm going to recognize for item one, Mr. Jeff Triesenberg, our planning director. Good evening, Mr. Triesenberg.
Good evening. All right. All right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members.
Sure.
Try to prep myself here for taking notes as best I can. Admittedly, this isn't the best
It's a little crowded up
room-wise
there, I
to
can
do
see.
that, but and what I've done here is to just and maybe the screen will let me put both of these kind of side by side so we don't have to flip back and forth per se. If we need to reference both of them. But yes, this is a first stab at a proposal for a batch of text amendments that would help us implement the Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan if it should be adopted. Currently, the plan is in review with the Planning Commission. They took a look at it last month and will be continuing, or this current month, still in June. And they will take another look at it in July and hopefully be prepared to make a recommendation for you to have it come back to you in early August. So staff has been, reading through it again, this time more from rather than an editorial perspective, more from a form and function perspective, with the idea that there are some things that likely need to be changed in the UDO to help implement it along. This is not envisioned to be a completely thorough in its scope. I definitely would envision additional rounds of things, but definitely would like to get your input to see if there's anything in the plan that you've noticed that you think should be addressed sooner. Be glad to take the next month and go back and look at some other things to see if we can find proposed language that would help in specific areas that you're interested in. And then two would also be to come back to you with exact language. So at this point, what we've done is we just kind of identified the points where we feel like there's a need or could be a need for some language changes and tried to give you the sense of the general direction that we think we should head. But it definitely would invite your feedback on that direction as well. So without further ado, Section 2 of your staff report describes the proposed changes. And the first one that we highlighted was just that throughout the document would be to, throughout the UDO, to correct any errors, omissions, and sections of the original adopted UDO that are subject to amendment within this case. So if we've missed anything at this point in time, just to say, hey, if there's a cross-reference or there's a reference to another section that plays with the one that we're trying to change. When we come back to you with the complete language, we will have those hopefully thoroughly vetted at that time and can give you the complete look. But that was just kind of my catch-all. But, and what I did too here is we just tried to organize them kind of chronologically by section number, but then we also tried to group them for you so you could kind of see which amendments kind of play together. So the first one is related to page 118 in the document, and I'll try to kind of forward these and keep them together. And let me see if I can switch to a single page view. And I can't see my page number. That's not good. Just a touch. Well, it's not. 120, 118. Okay, so there we need to go. All right, so one of the objectives there, and when I'm saying the objectives, I'm referring to the green text, which is what Matt pointed out to you would kind of form the rubric of what we would be examining future rezonings against. Kind of somewhat similar to the list of items that you get at the end of your staff reports today. And so the goal there is, or the objective there is to encourage retrofit and adaptive reuse of existing residential structures for commercial uses in some portions of the planning area. So currently in the UDO, that's not a very easy process to go from residential to commercial. There's a number of building code issues that come into play already, but the zoning ordinance also makes it quite laborious. Specifically, the nonconformities chapter, which is that section 2, treats those as a change of use, and that change of use then triggers virtually almost complete compliance with all the regular standards of the UDO, which, as you can imagine, standards for residential when it comes to everything, parking, landscaping, lighting, is much different than for a commercial parcel. So one of the things that we had proposed or thought might be helpful without, venturing too far away from good practices would be to allow for the buffers and screening elements and the outdoor lighting to amend those requirements. So where the parcel particularly has access to shared and or public parking, to not make those parcels provide their off-street parking. Because as you can imagine, a typical house has a driveway that might have room for 1 or 2 cars. You change that over to commercial, and let's just say it's retail, all of a sudden you have a requirement for 1 vehicle for every 200 square feet of retail space. The parking demand is much higher. Obviously, we don't want to do this in places where there is no other parking options, because we don't want to be creating those kind of issues either. But by tying it to there being either a shared parking possibility, which the ordinance already allows for, so they could work with a neighboring property potentially, or if there's public parking available and that public parking is deemed adequate enough that we could then back off on those requirements of needing to bring that up to full code compliance. Buffers and screening as well on the residential, between individual residential lots. There's not buffers required, but just between the subdivisions at the time of development, whereas commercial properties always have that. As you can remember, we widened our buffers, but we did also in like the downtown area, we made in the ordinance an exception that if it's in the traditional business district, the buffers are actually 0 because we do allow for 0 lot line development. The building can go all the way to the lot line. So we feel like most of this, that's probably the area where this would happen, but there could be other spots in town over time where at least, you know, there might still be some demand for this in the future. So we could either go away with the buffers completely, or we could look at some kind of alternative, whether it's like half of the prescribed buffer or whatever the case may be. This would not exempt them, though, from meeting the overall tree canopy requirements. So they would still have to work within the site if there's not trees canopy-wise to bring that part up to code. It's just that they wouldn't be required to necessarily put them all in the buffer. It would tend to concentrate them in other parts of the site because the buffer width may or may not be there.
If, don't let me interrupt unnecessarily, but if at certain pauses you are looking for comment or questions from council, I'll be happy to recognize council members, but otherwise I'll
Yep.
try to take my cue from you when you're ready.
Sure. And so the next bullet, which you can see is indented, kind of goes with that, and that's what I was alluding to. In section 10.6.7a, potentially look at another thing that we've noticed is that smaller commercial lots are having a hard time meeting those expanded buffer widths. 2 acres seems to be a critical point. The old ordinance did have an exemption for parcels under a certain size. I believe it's either 1 or maybe 1.5 acres, I think. So kind of in keeping with that idea of with the residential to commercial conversions, also potentially if we're really trying to encourage these smaller businesses, which may be on smaller lots if they want to own their own and not just rent from a strip center, to take a look at whether or not we can narrow that. Again, they still have to meet their overall tree requirements, but potentially reducing that buffer width to make those smaller lots a little more viable. Because for some of them, you may only have a 75-foot wide lot. Depending on what the neighboring parcels are zoned, the new ordinance could very easily have a 35-foot buffer. If you had 35 feet on both sides, you've pretty much eaten up the majority of the usable parts of the lot. So we have noticed that there does need to probably be a reinstatement of some kind of lot size threshold. And again, right now our recommendation would be for 2 acres or less, not to do away with the buffers completely, but to potentially reduce them by 50% of the requirement for the buffer, but still keeping the full tree requirements in play. It would just give them more flexibility of where to put them.
Set of questions for most of these.
Sure.
And so one is, so for this one specifically, are you looking at specific zoning districts, or, because it says portions of the planning area, so what's the envisioned location, and what are some examples of where this has come to be a problem, and how does this help that? I know downtown is a special case, but,
Right.
and it seems kind of geared towards that, but I wonder if, are there other places in town where this is sort of conversion from residential to commercial?
Yeah, so not so much on the conversion from residential to commercial. That side, it is pretty much limited to downtown, I would say, at this point. Although there might be some places along Timber Drive, I can't think of any right off the top of my head. And then again, maybe in the Auburn area, that older part of the community where some of it actually is already zoned commercial. There's a commercial residential mix there happening. And I could see that kind of becoming its own little downtown center. But otherwise, so for the residential to commercial conversion, I kind of see it limited to that. On the just the overall acreage size. Again, you'd just be looking at anything that's a non-residential district, so the neighborhood mixed use and all the way up to the activity center zoning, just where there's these really small parcels, which in some cases that might be sometimes the older out parcels, if they're redeveloping, that can be a little bit of a challenge because the buffers were considerably less width-wise, but we did go ahead and widen them just to give things a little more room to breathe and encourage some variability. Along 401, we've had a few parcels there that some of that along that corridor, we're seeing some demand for conversion. So yeah, I think still very limited in scope because most of your commercial parcels tend to be bigger than that 2 acres.
I guess the last sort of repeat questions, what are some of the, in your conversations, some of the potential unintended consequences? I know it's hard to anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, so
But-
we've been trying to think of some of those, and admittedly, before proposing to shrink the buffers, to looking at, okay, we don't want to necessarily back off on the landscaping as a whole. So I think we still feel pretty comfortable about that because of the way the new ordinance breaks down the lot. You still have those overall requirements for the various sides of the building. It's just that it does seem to take off the emphasis of just putting it within that one spot, which in some respects isn't a bad thing. But that was the one biggie that we've seen, but would definitely invite and encourage folks to poke holes.
In the definition of small, non-residential, mixed-use lots, what is that the 2 acres and below, or is that the definition being used there? Okay.
And like I say, 2 acres seems to be, but I could also see where maybe 1.5, just trying to find that balance there, where to draw that line. But I think it's definitely somewhere in there, that 1.5 to 2.
Thank you.
And we did also take a look at a couple of examples. One was actually along the 401 corridor where it did butt up to some residential property, and looking at how the buffers under the new ordinance compared to the old, and at least by cutting it in half, only in half, it seemed to at least preserve the distance from the old ordinance. Maybe it was not planted as densely, but at least the distance separation was still the same as it had been under the old. So that seemed like a fairly reasonable kind of solution. Mm-hmm.
Questions or comments from other council members? You have anything down here? Okay.
The next group is admittedly the biggest, and they kind of play on each other. And I forgot to put the page number in here, but it's initiative number 4.
37, Joe. 37.
Thank you. So page 37 in the plan. 32, 36, 37. All right. And this is also then tied to the framework map. And this was probably the biggest thing that popped out to Matt when he was looking at our ordinance, and is that the way this has kind of been structured now and pitched is that the focus for this particular activity center is really on employment. And I know that we've discussed a lot about our industrial zoning, up on Jones Sausage Road and the whole Amazon corridor, that does have a very warehouse type feel, and that's not really, the top priority of various groups here in the town, and really trying to focus in on those uses that we would really like to attract to truly build more of what I think we all would agree is more of a true employment base and not just non-residential or warehousing. And currently, we really don't have a zoning district that would focus on that or really allow us to focus on that. The activity center was really geared more towards the activity center zoning that we have in the new ordinance was really geared towards the transit centers to encourage the retail residential kind of mix and not so much the industrial side of things. So one of the biggest thing that we feel we could do would be to propose some type of new zoning district. Matt and I went back and forth on what to possibly name it for quite a few calls. But ultimately, for the purposes of this, I relied on the language that's in the draft ordinance, where it talks about innovation and technology and the idea of centers and campuses. So I proposed naming it the Innovation and Technology Center Zoning District, and adding that to our non-residential mixed-use category. As I noted, there's just not a district currently that really fully encompasses, and again, I quoted directly, the small-scale retail, also residential units above office, retail, or university uses that really focus on the technology, creativity, and innovation, and could support those things like corporate headquarters, university, hospital, research and development campuses, manufacturing centers, or other centers of excellence. So I think we would definitely be looking at, input from you as a council, perhaps also from the GEDC, and others, just to see exactly what uses we would like to have and encourage in this zoning district. So that includes down here in section 5.9 and section 6.1, we'd have to determine that list of uses. Right now, our uses in that industrial kind of category are very, very broad. So we need to probably chop those down to pull out the things that might be covered in a light industrial definition or a warehousing definition, and really get to those specific things that we want. And I feel like staff has a pretty good idea of where y'all would like that to go, but would definitely welcome some input there. And then, of course, we would also have to establish some development standards, so setbacks, building heights, and things like that. So we'd probably be looking at a mix between, somewhere between what the industrial districts require and maybe what that activity center district requires, somewhere in there. You still want to have, I think, some pretty decent buffers between these centers and what's around them. But we can certainly be more flexible in some respects with those as well. And then for this AC and the ITC district, also look at potentially establishing on page 101, it talks about, in page 100, encouraging infill development and redeveloping in existing developed areas and to build a community attractive to today's businesses and their employees. Looking at establishing a tiered kind of approach again to that special use permit threshold, and doing it based on zoning districts to incentivize those things, to both infill as well as the new ITC and AC districts. It's important to remember both of those are not on the zoning map today, and should be applied only in conformance with the general framework map that we talked about before. So wherever those regional employment activity centers are identified, or in the case of the new ITC zone, and the regional transit activity centers in the case of the AC zone, and look at bumping that up perhaps to 250,000 square feet in those districts, as well as sites within the town's corporate limits.
I have a question. I was under the impression that with the UDO rewrite, that the conditional zoning district served the purpose of allowing the flexibility within adaptability of the zoning district we have to meet what we didn't have. So I'm not quite sure. And then I see this sort of notion of tiered special use permits in this specific district, but I don't see them kind of clearly delineated. And I'm a proponent of keeping the SUP the way it is because it gives us the vetting ability. So I guess I'm just confused as to why someone couldn't come and want to do an AC district as a conditional zoning and change the conditions to meet the surroundings in a way that is appropriate.
Right. So the district we have close enough would be the AC, but there's probably some uses there, and I'd have to go back and take a very detailed look. But when I went through it the first time, it seemed like there might be some uses that would fit more of an employment base that weren't already in the AC as a possible use. And so the conditional district doesn't allow you to bring in other uses outside of what's already permitted in that district. So it just seemed like we needed to have that ITC to really start with that big list that then, yes, we would condition
We
down.
could solve that by increasing the acceptable uses in activity center, and then they could select out. And I mean, there was so much work that went in, sitting on the UDO rewrite into the activity center and making sure it was flexible enough that it sounds like the fix might, instead of creating a whole new type of zoning district, would be to expand the existing district for more uses, and then that way select out the ones that
Yeah.
aren't applicable or narrow the list down.
Yeah.
That's just, it seems easier to expand that.
Yeah. Admittedly, you could. I think we were just thinking that the way the comp plan has fleshed out, that because there is an identified difference between the transit and the employment, that maybe it made sense to just start with a different set so that folks didn't necessarily have to think so much about that. But it could go that way too.
You identify the transit differences, but it sounds like this is be a dense or intense enough use that it would have to be transit adjacent anyway.
Transit adjacent, yes, but in a different way. The transit, especially when you're talking about campuses versus trying to walk more tightly, I guess, I see a little bit of a different geographic scope to that, and maybe the different types of uses or types of users, and the one having more of a residential component than the other. So you can expand the walk radius. Most times they talk about a quarter mile. Well, I guess we're envisioning these campuses potentially being bigger than that. Not to say that a half mile is not uncomfortable to walk, but for some people there is that difference between what's within a quarter mile and what's within a half. So that quarter mile just tends to focus more on being vertical and tighter in, whereas this one, I think we were envisioning being a little bit bigger, still having some vertical component to it, but not as much. And then, like you say, having transit adjacent versus transit integrated.
Even the height limitations are limitations, so even an activity center could accommodate a more
Yeah.
tapered sort of structure, but,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so then, if we were to add, the new district, we just have to make sure that all the tables include, an extra column to address those things. I do still think that the parsing of the uses is critical, because I think clearly we have some larger use categories that just encompass too much, and we might be getting things that we would rather not incentivize, at the sake of having things we do want to incentivize being lumped together in those use categories. But we'll focus on that for sure, coming to you next month. And again, like I say, anything that y'all can provide in the terms of the types of things that you would like to. And again, in the comp plan, it talks about incentives. Incentives can be financial. Sometimes they are bonuses and credits or a little more leeway or higher thresholds in the UDO. So we just tried to take a look at, from the UDO perspective, what are some carrots that we can put into the writing to try to, make things a little more streamlined for those uses that you specifically want to target. It doesn't have to be every use, just ones that you want to put out there and say, hey, for this use, we'd like you to come. This is our zoning district. This is our process, and hopefully have them view that as streamlined and straightforward as possible, if it's something you truly, truly want to bring here. So that's pretty much the crux of that. Again, we just pointed out a lot of the individual sections where we knew we would have to just bring in some parallel standards. But again, looking to kind of a mix of the industrial and the activity center standards to that. I don't think there's a tremendous reinventing of the wheel either way we go. Moving to we looked at all of the maps as well, so looking at the development and intensity map on page 58. One of the things that we realized is that in many of the places where we expect the most change, we also have corridor overlays in those areas. So where the brighter reds come, that's I-540, it's US 70, it's 401, and we have some pretty potentially stringent height restrictions in those. So one of those things that could be changed would be to expand the building height cap in that commercial highway overlay district. Right now, it only speaks to having exemptions, I think it's east of New Rand Road. So it did account for the White Oak shopping area and everything that's going on at Greenfield Parkway and places like that. But in order for North-South Station in that area to really kind of take off and have higher height limits available, not only does the underlying zoning have to support it, but the overlay as well. And so currently there would be a cap in this area here at North-South Station and even potentially further south here along 401. So again, looking again, but specifically here because of that level 4C and the height levels that would promote, we would want to then look at potentially excluding the area from Purser Drive to McCormick Street along that 7401 corridor to allow for up to 10 stories of development in keeping with the plan. Similarly, the next one in support of the level 4C areas, again, anywhere throughout the corridor, so here at Old Stage as well as up here on Rock Quarry, changing the height restrictions in that limited highway overlay to 200 feet above grade to allow for up to 20 stories of development as called for in the plan. Those corridors do have, though, the focus of a substantial visual buffer, and so there is a 50-foot buffer that we would want to continue to preserve. So being sure to allow, the buildings to come no closer than 65 feet to those highway boundary property lines so as not to disturb the root zone of the trees that are in that 50-foot buffer. But that's something to think about. Are you comfortable? Because currently, if there was something tall that came along that corridor, it would be stepped back very far. But are you okay then with this kind of approach that the comp plan would be supporting? There's not always a whole lot of depth that you can go, and you end up losing a lot of potentially some usable space, then are you okay with more of a driving by North Hills? Admittedly, though, North Hills doesn't have a huge vegetative buffer there. There's some trees there that are still in the 440 right-of-way, but actually on the property themselves, there's not much. But, can you be okay with the idea of having that building coming up behind that buffer and not being stepped back? I'll pause on those two because they kind of go together.
They're very large buffers.
Yeah.
And that's just my comment. Even if you had side paths and sidewalks and, that's a huge buffer. And it limits, we just talked about reducing buffers to allow more commercial. So now it's kind of like, well, let's just make these really large buffers. I don't see the continuity of the intent.
So admittedly, that one is tied into more of a county-wide effort for the interstates to try to keep them more scenic. And it has been a topic of debate here lately as to whether or not that's, still kind of the county's collective thing. Raleigh has certainly raised that question. They've approached it. Some of the arguments I've heard have been more from a walkability standpoint, but then at the same time, others have expressed, well, if you're going to cross the interstate, that's not a short distance anyhow. 50 more feet on either side. How much is that really inhibiting the walkability from side to side? Should the focus of the walkability be within the development itself and not, the ease? You want to let people do it, but does it have to be? Can you treat that with the same kind of compact, like I say, that internal walkability, that the interstate's just so wide of a barrier that it just kind of naturally inhibits that? So but yeah, there's been good debate on both sides. But that actually was one of the things that for a long time has been in the county's ETJ policy, is that in order to grant ETJ, one of the things that they look at is, do you have rules that continue to protect those buffers along the interstates? They haven't done away with it yet.
Other comments, observations, questions?
Then on page 107, let me just go down, 74. Again in green, this is one where I can see, and I'm sure Matt he's expressed to me that there's a lot that could be done in this. When you get to the design portions and the design elements, you can take that, as far as you want. And I could kind of see where maybe there's a round two where we come back and really dig in on some of the finer details of the design elements that you might want to see. But just at a very basic level for this first go around, and this is something that we dealt with just recently, and we've had a couple more cases potentially come up, that in support of the objective that neighborhoods in Garner should reflect the community's values and preference towards housing mix, building quality, and neighborhood amenities. That's very, very broad, and this is now going to sound very specific, but to eliminate the need for the fence variance before the Board of Adjustment. In the old ordinance, it was called a special exception, and that special exception had different criteria than what a full-blown typical variance does. And we had one of these in front of the Board of Adjustment, and we had to do the full variance analysis. And I think the town attorney would agree with me that that was cumbersome and at times a little difficult. And really, the only thing is that in the old ordinance, they just wanted someone else to verify that, okay, if you put up an 8-foot fence, you're not blocking any kind of site issues. The ordinance today has those site issues already built in. So folks would have to identify their site triangles and make sure that that 8-foot fence is not going to be blocking those things. And quite honestly, if a 6-foot fence is blocking them, it's the same. The fact that it's 8 versus 6 feet really doesn't make a difference from a site visibility perspective. So if we're comfortable with allowing 8-foot fences in the backyard, let's just allow them. So that's that. It was already on the list of things to potentially fix, but we just thought we'd bring it forward.
So is an 8-foot fence kind of the upper level that we would expect in most situations?
Yeah, so in the ordinance, there's certain places where they would be allowed, and there's some districts where you can go higher in some of the commercial, I think, and industrial districts, but they do have to be engineered, and they do have to be a certain type of material. But this is something that's already in the ordinance. It's just that you have to go to the Board of Adjustment to verify that the site issues aren't. And like I say, when it was under a special exception, it was a much more streamlined process. But 160D got rid of those and said you have to call everything a variance. And the variance standards are completely different. And it was very hard to navigate that.
Can imagine.
And speaking, again, of design standards, again, we can take this as far as you all ever want to. But in terms of strengthening the design standards for non-residential development, one of the things that staff has seen is that, one, we need to add an open space requirement for non-residential because currently there is not. The plan has all these, common greens, town squares that have been identified as being appropriate for those non-residential areas. Other than just saying we want them, there's no rule to have them. So the first thing would be to introduce a requirement for those non-residential areas. We've tentatively looked at 5% of the project area. Residential is 10. So we've looked at 5 and run a few parcels against that just to see what the size of the common green and square might end up being. And it looked to be like that would be sufficient to ensure that we get those spaces. Let's see here. And then also to emphasize, with the whole emphasis on the public realm as being that unifying structure. Swift Creek Apartments, kind of that you saw recently, tried to get at some of that by kind of creating that visual corridor between the two parts of the development where they had the different type of paving material and kind of that alley kind of feature there. But it does talk about also in the plan about really emphasizing the open space even further when you're close to parks and other town facilities. So you're already kind of expecting there, that the park and the openness of the town facilities already kind of gives you that sense of civic space. So should the open space in the private realm also be elevated a little bit more? And so I think that one's actually in there pretty specifically about proposing that. And again, a quarter mile of the parkland, that's that walk shed. So increasing the open space requirements by 50% for those developments. So you're getting a little bit more in terms of volume and what they're contributing. And then on page 106.
Sorry, Jeff,
Oh, go
before
ahead.
you, about
Yeah.
the open space, is there, in the new UDO, would there be a need to expand the active definition of open space? Because I know that it's accounted for, kind of a broad category of trees, and it doesn't, I don't remember if the current UDO solved that problem of specifying open space versus natural preservation areas.
Right. So in the new ordinance on the residential side, within the total open space, we adjusted it so that on the tree preservation side, only so much of that could count to open space because we were getting a lot of double counting there. And then we also required a subset, I think it was maybe 30%, had to be active versus passive. In this, we were thinking less on the active side and more on the passive, although it would be more formal in the shape of a square or a green, that it would still have mostly passive improvements as opposed to a playground or, soccer goals or whatever the case might be. But that would be something to think about.
Yeah, because, you mentioned in there the 4 categories: greenways, common greens, public squares, and plazas all imply open meeting space. And I know
Right.
Mr. Singleton is forever bringing up the lack of play space in neighborhoods. And you drive through some of these new neighborhoods, and you don't see it. And then you drive by someplace and you see it, and it's full of kids just running around. And so
Yeah.
I know this is commercial, but it's sort of,
It's
what do we want the function of that space to be? And we don't turn it into, like you were just saying, double counting. Oh, well, this is part of our tree canopy preservation, but it's not really consistent with that. What's sort of being communicated as the intent, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so we could definitely take a look at making some additional tweaks in the final language to really make sure that we're honing in on that, for sure. Yeah, because you want to have some trees in those squares, obviously, but you don't want it replaced by, so we could take a look at maybe even just outright, I don't see any reason why, thinking about it, to just eliminate tree preservation as qualifying in commercial for open space. The open space should truly be.
Question over here, Jeff.
Yep.
We'll follow up because, as Mr. Dellinger mentioned, it's one of my objectives. And I've spoken with you about this, how we approved a 200-unit townhome development right beside my office, and there's no space in there for them to play, so they play on a vacant lot and right in front of our office, play soccer, to play football, parents out there with them sometime. It's also used as a dog park, but people clean their stuff up. And that's important. I heard this at last campaign, people said, there's nothing flat. They said, what you qualify for open space is on the edge of a creek or
Yeah.
tree, and you just need open land. I looked at this proposal we're going to talk about, item number 2 on the agenda, and too much junk they're going to put in the parks. Just make it space and put some benches on the side.
Yeah.
Just let kids have a place to play, because I talked to some of the folks out there, the parents, and although South Garner Park is not that far away, if you're 8, 9, and 10 years old and you don't want them crossing Neighborsboro Road and all of them don't have a bicycle, it's far away.
Yeah.
And so they lose 2 building lots. The amenity will more than pay for itself, because people can say there's open space here that kids can come and play.
Yeah.
If they want to throw up a portable soccer ball out there, fine, then you pick it up and take it out, and it can be written in with the HOA. But the space for kids to have the opportunity, because we're trying to build new parks, but they're not accessible to everyone. And again, that townhome development beside us really opened my eyes, and I've spoken with you about this before, so the space needs to be, again, not the side of a creek.
Yep.
That's open space. Yes, it's open space, but, it's narrow
Right.
and not very amenable to the kids who want to get out there and roll the ball around and play.
Yeah, I think the new ordinance gets us much further there on the residential side. This hopefully will enable us to get where we want to be on the non-residential side. And then having this plan is really, it's already helping, because we're using it to really convey, hey, when we're really talking about these open spaces, this is what we're talking about.
And to Mr. Singleton's point, Buffalo Grove is another example where there's no place
Yeah.
to play and there are no sidewalks to get you to a park. Other question related to this, and this goes into kind of broader questions of definitions of residential, non-residential, and mixed use. So is this meant to address also mixed use residential types of development, or is all that still falling under the residential guidelines? So when you have a mixed use zoning where, the one we just had
Yeah.
delineated commercial on one side, but then you get into real mixed use development. Well, okay, what standard are you using for open space?
Yeah.
Is it commercial and all of a sudden we don't have to do any? Or, so I think that's something we need to clarify and lean towards the residential requirements in those situations, at least as a baseline.
Yeah,
Because
no,
I know
would
I
agree.
could come in there if I could not have to do open space, I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't. I mean,
Yeah, at this point, it is very much, it's all structured on that use table. So everything from RA through MFB is grouped in a residential heading. From NMX to AC or HI is all mixed-use, non-residential. So that's where we can definitely take a look at kind of reevaluating that. Because, if the majority of it ends up being residential,
people are going to be
Yeah.
living there.
yep,
They need that recreation space. They need people space.
right, yep. Good comment, thank you. All right, moving to section 9 of the ordinance. On page 120, we have a objective of establishing compatibility and transition standards that respect the spaces between existing and future development. This one I want to work on. I couldn't find a graphic that really conveyed what I wanted to for this meeting, but I'm still working on it. I may have to create one of my own. We already, when they rewrote the ordinance, Stewart did try to put something, in the ordinance about this, where if you've got, primarily ranch level one-story buildings, one-story office buildings, or whatever it may be, that you don't immediately jump to 3 or 4 stories right at the property line. They did introduce some distance separation, but in reviewing some of the literature that's out there on effective transition and what's jarring to the person at 6 feet above ground or 5 feet above ground, versus what's not. The goal here would be to, again, establish kind of a view shed. And at what point, do you want, the sun to be able to come in and light up the area versus being blocked by the building's shadow? Or just what would you rather walk outside of your building, and at what point do you want to see something that's 5 stories high? A lot of the literature that I've reviewed out there from a sunshine perspective talks about trying to maintain a 45-degree angle. I don't know that that's the primary thing that we're looking at, and I think that might be maybe a little too aggressive. And so maybe we want to look at, from somebody's property line, looking at a 30-degree angle. So pushing those taller buildings a little bit further away to give more of a distance, of that transition. The ones that look at 45 feet, usually they fall somewhere around the width of 100 feet. So that 45-degree angle exists for 100 feet, and then you can start going up higher. I kind of felt like maybe 150 feet would be better. Just trying to think about, half a football field. Is that okay?
The one that kind of jumps to mind is the apartments going up on Aversboro next to the church and the child care center, right there in the.
Yes, I know.
And it's 3 stories, and it's not intrusive. But I'm also thinking, in certain parts of Garner, the point of reference is the height of the trees.
Right.
Because anything as tall as a tree, and if it's not taller than the trees around it, it's
Right.
not any more intrusive than
Than
the
the trees.
trees.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I drive by it all the time, it's new, so it always catches my eye, but it's not jarring to be that close to those other building heights. It might be if you were out in the wide open somewhere, but 3 stories is not really that tall.
Yeah.
I think when you start getting to 5, it changes. So I'm not sure what the change in the UDO is on that height. So I don't know.
You get to, when I walked it through kind of in my mind how it works, you get to that 3 stories fairly easily. I think it did tend to block more of the taller structures. But yeah, admittedly, dropping that down to 30 degrees would probably start to push some of those 3 stories maybe a little further away. But yeah, if you all don't, feel like 3 stories is really all that jarring. Sometimes it depends on the topo. If that 3-story building's lower than the 1-story building, that certainly helps. But yeah, we quite often when we're talking about height, we equate mature pine stands kind of with the 3-story building. They're not dramatically different. But yeah, if 3 stories from 1 to 3 doesn't tend to cause you as much heartburn, we can certainly take a look at modifying that and really focusing on the 1 to 4 or the 1 to 5.
Comments otherwise? 3 stories.
Is that what it is now? Like, what is it now?
It's a 45-degree angle, I think, up to, or no, I'm sorry. They treat it by story in the ordinance currently. We haven't used it hardly yet. So you can't add but kind of 1 story at a time. So I don't think you can go straight from 1 to 3 unless there's some kind of space in between.
You get a better, when you're talking about infill, as long as you're maintaining the buffers, which we've been good about in the preservation in those buffers, you're going to get a higher quality infill product, I think, and it's kind of a better opportunity than forcing them to stagger heights. That's just my thought. Again, that one structure is my kind of frame of reference
Yeah.
for that massing of a building in the middle of an older part of Garner.
Yeah,
And when done right, it's not terrible.
right. Okay.
Anybody else?
On page 116, again, there's another goal here about, again, getting to the design parts of things. Again, you can take this as far as you want. We used to be much more stringent on even signage, for example. The ordinance has kind of loosened that up. Because it used to be that, every sign in a development, if their chosen colors were green and white, like at Timber Crossing, I think it is, the Burger King had to come in and have a green and white sign. Is it okay to let people express their corporate side a little more on their signage? I've always kind of defaulted to allowing that, but trying to encourage a little more unity amongst the structures themselves, because the structures themselves will always be there. The various businesses may change from time to time. Currently, we don't have a requirement in the ordinance that all of the structures have some kind of architectural unity. Under the old ordinance, there were some vague kind of allusions to what previous staff called unity of development. I think some of you may remember those, the whole unity of development standards. Those were really brought about by the overlay districts, but we kind of applied them town-wide. But I do think it would be good to introduce again some kind of architectural unity, whether it's just one primary building material that gets carried over, or if there's some physical architectural element they want to use in each building. We're usually pretty flexible with them on that, or have been historically. And so, again, I think that's an easy one that we have experience with as staff, that's a requirement that we can reintroduce without too much effort or heartburn. And then finally, in section 11, in support of on page 134 in the document, where it talks about a tree canopy preservation program for the planning area. Admittedly, we already have done most of the work for this. This is one of those things, though, where we did catch an error in the rewrite. We did not get the exception for the traditional business district to have their tree canopy on a district-wide basis as opposed to a parcel-by-parcel basis. So if you'll remember, we went through that UDO amendment to make that change, and we did that at the same time we, I think, adjusted the thresholds for both the residential and non-residential. So again, we just want to clean that up and bring that back into the UDO. So that's what I have for you this evening. And again, on the building design and some of the site design stuff, but particularly the building design, we can go as far with those kind of things as you would like. We will continue to be reading through these goals and objectives and researching some things that other communities do. And again, I think the next package that we would bring to you would be more of a design focused. But really here, getting the open space right, making sure that we've got the right districts in place or tweaking the districts, whichever that may be, and getting the tree preservation all squared away. I think those are the most important pieces that we want to have squared away as soon out of the gate as we can.
Okay, I'm looking at, I guess, a recommendation at the bottom.
Yes, so again, just you've been given feedback along the way, so thank you very much for that. We would look to try and line up the public hearing for this to happen right after, hopefully this document gets approved so that we can have that ball rolling and officially kind of on the books so that everybody's aware that these text amendments are coming. They can't say they didn't know that they weren't. And then also to next month bring back to you a more detailed, hey, here's the language, that exact language that we're looking at changing, and getting your feedback on that.
With the objective being, if those dates hold, to bring this on August 8th. Is that
Yes,
right?
if everything holds. If not, we'll adjust
Yeah,
accordingly.
shift it around.
A question, so with the plan approval, what all will we be approving as part of that?
So as part of the actual plan approval, it'll just be this document. And then the text amendments, by having that hearing the same night, then everybody's at least, hey, they've been introduced, you can't not.
But the comp plan includes the land use map and the break-even analysis work. Where is that? Because I know there was talk of introducing a tool in conjunction with the comprehensive plan. What's the status of that relative to the comp plan?
Admittedly, I'm not as on the details of that, so.
So we just got a final draft from Matt this week. I've shared it with the management team to review and provide feedback on, so not exactly sure what his timeline is to make any corrections we may have, but it should be within the next several weeks we'll have that wrapped up.
Yeah, so that would be another tool at our disposal for reviewing. And then there's also there is a GIS-based tool that he will be providing some training to us internally how to use to try to accomplish some of that.
So, I mean, I think given the connectedness of the town's budget and what we analyze and approve, I think that having that tool presented to us so we understand it, and so when you present it to us, we understand what you're presenting to us and how it works. But I think having those things, those intertwined, because there are certain fiscal ambitions in the comp plan, and to not know if we have the tool to reinforce that element of the plan, I think is kind of, if they're done at the same time, I think it makes more sense.
Yeah.
I also think that given that the land use plan is going to be approved as well, I know planning commission has received a lot of amendments and adjustments and kind of gone through a fine-tooth comb through that. And those are changes we haven't seen, so haven't been through a public hearing, that it might be useful for, since the steering committee was the council and the planning commission, to have another joint session to walk through the version that emerges from the planning commission, also to go through the text amendments as well, because just to make sure, so that, I think if council and planning commission can get on the same page on the text amendments, it'll help that process move even quicker. Those will go through faster. So I think the 8th is a little ambitious, because there needs to be a final version emerging from the planning commission that we have time to consume, and also that the public has time to consume as well. So again, I think there's merit in having a joint session either late July, early August, to catch as many little pieces, because there's a lot to go through, and I'm just not sure there's enough time from the planning commission's meeting in July until our work session to then go through all of that and the text amendments again, to fully vet what is getting drafted.
Whatever time frame y'all are comfortable with, we'll be glad to work with and do what we can.
Well, I was thinking to the July work session, but did you indicate you feel like that's not going to be opportune time?
Planning commission will be reviewing it again in July, so July 10th or 11th or something
11th
like
or
that.
10th, I think.
And
July
so
10th.
whatever changes they make will have to be compiled, and then we'll have to get it in time enough to read it. So that's why I think there'll be a lot to go through, and I think a joint, a couple weeks after that version we get that version, a joint session in a training room or something with them to kind of walk through everything. And then it also gives us the opportunity, if they made certain changes to what was your rationale over here, and kind of just get it kind of directly, because I think that helps. Once it's adopted, both bodies really understand what we're reading from literally the same sheet of music at that point. So.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, let me see if other council members want to weigh in on that structure or that time frame. Anybody?
I'm not sure what we have on the July work session. If there's not a lot, we could definitely work to try to get as much of that together for that, without having to necessarily introduce a lengthy meeting off schedule.
So would it potentially squeeze staff too much to crowd it into that? We could, I guess the next option would be to move it to September.
Keep it moving.
Right now in our agenda package for July work session, we have the Jurgen Park Picnic Shelter Playground update and the Garner Parks Recreation Cultural Resources Comprehensive Master Plan update. So, but any of that's subject to change. And I don't know how extensive that master plan presentation is going to be. But so far, it's just those two items.
Maria says we can move that to August.
Oh, okay.
How's that?
It might get moved up. Yeah, I didn't see her over there. Yeah, through the screen. But yeah, okay.
But yeah, we're flexible.
It makes sense, because then we have time to, any changes from that, and we probably won't hit August 8th, but probably the next, there's enough time in there to integrate the sort of any other changes.
So not at the work session, and
I think if
they
that
can,
works for planning commission, I mean,
Yeah, we'll reach out to them and get their sense
Okay.
of,
I mean, if it can be done by then, ready to go, I think we would go ahead and do it in July, but, okay? Why don't we set that as our objective for right now, and
that sounds
can
good.
let,
We'll be in close coordination.
okay, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, thank you.
It's a lot of stuff to cover, and my reading has taken me through pretty much most all of this. There are a few pages I haven't finished, but there's a lot to assimilate there and to understand. But I personally think it's going to be an excellent tool moving forward.
Like I say, staff has already been using the plan, and we're very excited about getting everything kind of together, because it's been a lot of here, there, and there, and it's been a challenge to coordinate. So yeah, we're very excited, very excited.
Good. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Okay, council, are you ready to move on to item number 2 under discussion reports? Park at Garner Station Development Agreement, and let's see, I guess Mr. Shunk is going to lead us in that, for is he stepping?
Good evening.
Oh, excuse me.
Mayor and council members. Just to introduce, there's Robert Shunk from Gander Development and Matthew Carpenter, the attorney for the project. The rezoning proposal for what's now called the Park at Garner Station is getting ready to come before you for the public hearing on the rezoning application. This is a unique property in that town property borders it on two sides, Jurgen Park on one side and the Garner Recreation Park on the other side. The developer has proposed certain terms for a development agreement, which are in your packet. Staff wanted to get some feedback from you before making a formal response, so you won't have a staff response tonight. But this will give you a preview somewhat to the rezoning application, and then to discuss some of the terms that the developer has proposed. And just to remind you, a development agreement requires its own public hearing, which we can do jointly with the rezoning public hearing. However, we would have to have a written development agreement available for the public when the notice provision goes out for that. So what this is trying to give you as much time as possible to review this. What we would anticipate is getting feedback from you this evening on some of these terms, getting that written development agreement drafted to probably be reviewed at the July 18th regular meeting, and then possibly that would get it on the schedule for August 8th. For the first meeting for those two a joint public hearing for both of those items. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Shunk, I guess, who's going to make the initial proposal. And I'll drive the train to the extent you tell me to. So I don't know if you want the terms up or the plan up first.
I'm just going to make a short presentation, and then I'm going to allow Matthew to go through the points.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Robert Shunk with Gander Development. It's my pleasure to be before you this evening to begin presenting what we believe it will be a complementary master plan community to the existing downtown Garner and the greater Garner community, where residents can live, eat and drink, run and play, travel through the community on their feet, their bikes, or in their car. Our presentation this evening, as town attorney commented on, will focus on the developers agreement, as we've been working on that with the town attorney and the town manager on and off for the last several months. Joining with me this evening is Matthew Carpenter from Parker Poe, who will he'll walk you through the developers agreement. Collier Marsh, who has been working with us on the zoning aspect, was double booked this evening and was unable to attend, but he'll be with us in the coming weeks and months. I want to extend a big thank you to your town staff for their cooperation, John Hodges, Terry, Jeff, and his staff. We've been working on this since April of last year, so it's been quite some time, and we're excited to bring this before you. So with that, Matthew.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thanks, Robert. Good evening, Mayor Marshburn and members of council. I'm Matthew Carpenter with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh. And as Robert mentioned, the overall project here is the park at Garner Station, which is a large mixed-use project with commercial space, apartments, and townhomes that covers over 97 acres on East Garner Road. So it's a really large project, and projects of that size really require careful planning and coordination that we've been going through over the last year or so. And with such a large project, there are often multiple stages of approval, and two of the early stages are what we're in now, and that's the planned unit development rezoning, which is currently pending. It's still under staff review, and then the development agreement, which is really the focus of the discussion this evening. And although those two processes are certainly related in that they're for the same project, they are separate items that require separate hearings, as the town attorney mentioned, and review cycles. And so over the last several months, we've been working with town staff and the town attorney's office to allow us to get to a term sheet that we felt like was close to the final terms that we're going to put in the development agreement. And so the goal of that term sheet is to kind of set the stage for the formal development agreement that we'll draft after tonight's meeting. And so the goal for tonight is really to get your initial feedback on those terms, and then to take that feedback back and incorporate it into the development agreement as we move forward. And so for that reason, we might not have answers to all of your questions tonight, but it does allow us the opportunity to hear your concerns and comments before we get to the public hearing with the development agreement and the rezoning application. And in that same vein, there are a lot of conditions in the PUD text that are zoning conditions that will apply to the property. But since those are part of the PUD discussion, we won't delve into all of those tonight, but you will hear about those over the next couple of months. And so with that context, I'll give you a general overview of the term sheet, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions. And the term sheet addresses mainly three different areas of improvements. It addresses transportation improvements, parks and rec improvements, and sewer improvements. And so I'll start just by going through kind of each category. The transportation improvements for the project total several $1 million that the developer will spend in putting in the infrastructure for the project. And that's mostly off-site improvements, and then also roads internal to the project. And all of those improvements are addressed in the TIA, but the term sheet specifically addresses areas where we need collaboration with the town and the developer. And so one of those improvements is the major collector street that you can see on the plan that connects the project and Creech Road. And the goal of that collector street is to really improve overall connectivity by establishing an east-west connector there, and then also completing a street that's shown on the street plan. And then, of course, it also serves as our second point of primary access that's required under the code. And so the plan is for the developer to fund and construct the entire portion of the major collector, and we're not requesting specifically for the town to pay for that road. But one of the challenges is that the location of the road goes over Garner Recreational Park. And so because the original funding for the park received federal funds, we're required to pursue a permit to build the road over the park property. And so what we're asking for in the term sheet is for the town to work with us in obtaining that permit from the State Parks Department. It's actually issued from the Federal Parks Department, but you go through the State Parks Department. So several different bodies there will be involved. And we're not asking to completely, finalize that process now. The term sheet just is asking for the town to collaborate with us in filing that application. And then we're also constructing a local street along the shared property line with Jurgen Park. And the goal there is we've worked with staff to line the edge of that street up with the property line so that Jurgen Park can easily connect to that street when the time is appropriate to provide cross-access. So we think that'll really be a better cross-access connection than the dead-end street that was previously planned. And then there are several Parks and Rec improvements contemplated in the development agreement term sheet. And it's not surprising since we're surrounded on all sides by parks. And so one of those commitments is that the developer will construct 2 public multi-use paths across the property. And one of those will extend across the Garner Recreation Park property to connect the park with the development and then ultimately to Jurgen Park. And so, there are several, and those are just, again, the Parks and Rec improvements in the term sheet. There's a whole slew of open space and parks commitments in the PUD that we'll discuss at those hearings. And then finally, the term sheet also addresses sewer improvements. And for this project to connect to sewer, the developer will be constructing over 1.2 miles of sanitary sewer. And it's to the north of the property, I think to the right of your screen, kind of there. And that's a big part of this project because it's a ton of linear feet of sewer connection, and it'll also help with the Jurgen Park connection. I know there was a lot of money as part of the phase 1 of Jurgen Park to make a sewer connection, and these improvements will allow the park to connect to the nearby Pulte project, and hopefully save some capital expenditures there. And part of the process for obtaining approvals to build that sewer extension is that we've got to obtain a permit from the Army Corps because a lot of the extension is through the creek north of the property. And so what you'll see in the term sheet is that we've asked the town to work with us on that, and there have been some further discussions today between staff and Mr. Shunk on exactly what that will look like, and it's also probably going to require some coordination with the city of Raleigh. So, in that sense, it's kind of an agreement to agree to get the sewer done to the north of the property, which will benefit the project and Jurgen Park. And so overall, we think we've reached a term sheet that provides the developer certainty that the town will work with us in pursuing the needed improvements, and also provides the town certainty that the project will be built and the significant public contributions to the infrastructure will be realized. And so with that, we appreciate your time tonight, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Council, I'll start to my right and see. Mr. Vance, anything from you, sir?
No questions at this moment.
Okay, I'll go to my left to Mr. Matthews.
Nothing at this time.
Okay, Mr. Dellinger, back to my right.
I'll wait. I have
Okay.
comments.
Mr. Singleton.
Well, I've got lots of questions, and it's not related to the terms of what we're looking at. I appreciate all the road and the connector and everything, but I'm worried about where we're connecting at Garner Road and where we're connecting at Creech Road. Because the frontage on this property on Garner Road is very narrow, so there will be very little improvements made to Garner Road, excluding turn lanes into the property, which you understand. Don't know what may or may not happen at Creech Road, because where it comes out at Creech Road, and I drove by it on the way to the meeting tonight, I go that way often, it's just narrow two-lane road, not improved or anything. So that's a huge concern in this project. I know it's not in this terms of agreement, but it's in terms of transportation because this is roughly 1,000 units. And I emailed staff yesterday and asked them how many existing residential, single-family, multifamily townhomes, whatever it may be, we had north of Garner Road currently, and it was 1863, and there's a couple of townhome developments pending, so you're talking a couple thousand units north of Garner Road from Northview Street down to 40. I think how long that stretch is. Northview is the far entrance into Cloverdale. That's 2,000 units, and there's 1,000 units being proposed for this. And the concerns on Garner Road are just tremendous, and Creech Road. And again, it's not the terms of the agreement, but it's the terms of the improvements to the road. But Garner Road has 10,000 plus vehicles a day, and that's just a massive concern on both these roads. I don't know how many trips will come out of 1,000 units. Not looking at the number of vehicles, we're looking at the number of trips. And that's a huge concern because, again, on Garner Road, it's just a very narrow little strip that's got to be improved based off our development ordinance. I know I'm not on the terms, but this is a concern. I'm going to start on it. We're having a hearing here soon, but I need to know these answers because right now this project has massive concerns to me.
I could speak to some of the traffic
Okay.
comments you made. Excuse me. So along East Garner Road, we will be making improvements from along our entire frontage and all the way up to and slightly past New Ran Road.
Okay.
We're also,
What I wanted to hear, so you're going to make it based off what's in our ordinance and by DOT standards and
Yeah,
town
so-
standards, so you're going to improve it from your spot to the New Ran Road intersection?
yeah, so to go, bottom of the sheet to going further east to there's a project on the other side of Jurgen Park that the Pulte community did.
Right.
They did a field widening. That widening will carry across Jurgen Park as part of the park project.
Right.
We will then continue that further west. And at the intersection of New Ran Road, through conversations with John Hodges, we've met with the NC, the North Carolina Railroad. We will be putting in a traffic signal at New Rand and East Garner Road. And there will actually be two signals, one at New Rand and East Garner, and one at New Rand and Main Street. They will be signal and timed all together. It'll act as one, but you'll see two, actually sets of lights there. The signal design, the signal installation itself is going to run about $1 million, and all of the improvements from New Rand down East Garner Road is going to be about $2 million of improvements.
And all those improvements are going to be on the north side, as it should be, correct?
All of the improvements will be on Garner Road,
On the
and
north
then
side.
there'll be a eastbound. Getting the maps turned. I'm getting my easts and wests confused. But anyway, there'll be an eastbound right turn lane off of Garner Road onto New Ran Road.
Okay. Right. The reason I bring this up is years ago, Wake County School System was looking at putting a high school here. And at the time, the traffic, which a couple thousand students, you got 1,000 homes, a couple thousand vehicles, one of the proposals was going to close the New Ran Road intersection. That was back then.
Not popular.
That was not very popular. That's why the town got on board and helped them find land elsewhere. So that's one big concern I have is the impact and the improvements on the road, because that was how they were going to try to alleviate some issues by just closing that intersection, which would have been devastating for the downtown.
Yeah, so we had, we hired a consultant, Ramey Kemp and Associates. They're not here this evening, but they're a traffic consultant. I believe they're also working for the town for Jurgen Park as well. And at the request of the town manager, we also studied about making the intersection at East Garner Road and New Ran Road a four-legged intersection versus a three-legged intersection. And there's a lot of numbers on my page. I won't bore you with it, but basically as a three-legged intersection in the morning, it'll operate 70% better than if it was a four-legged intersection, because basically you have one less movement to control. And in the afternoon, it's about a 55% improvement doing a three-legged intersection versus a four-legged. Furthermore, in their study, there's in the afternoon, there's about New Ran Road, as you all know, probably backs up to Highway 70. Well, with our project, with our projected traffic and with the traffic lights, we cut that in less than half.
It also in the afternoon backs up on Garner Road, heading west to turn left on New Rand Road. That's the turn queue there needs to be, well, it'll be, in this proposal, it would be improved. I get
So
what you're saying.
there'll be a 3-lane section between our entrance and New Rand Road.
Right.
A lot of opportunity for queuing. And then
Exactly.
at Creech Road, there'll be a southbound left turn lane onto the collector. So you'll come past the elementary school, and then there'll be a dedicated
Dedicated
left turn lane to turn into the collector street. And then I'll also relieve the intersection there at Creech and East Garner.
All right. Let others ask questions. You've answered the first questions I've asked. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good, Ms. Barringer, come back around. Kathy, do you have any?
Yes, I have some questions. You talked about road improvements going west on Garner Road. I'm up to New Rand Road or past New Rand Road. Will there be improvements some distance past New Rand Road?
No, so the only improvement on the other side of New Rand Road will be a eastbound right turn lane. So if you're coming from the Performing Arts Center, you will, as you approach New Rand Road, there will be a dedicated right-hand turn lane. So what that allow to do is people can keep going straight eastbound towards Jones Sausage, and then there'll be a turn lane for people to turn south on New Rand.
Okay. Let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. You said signalization. Are we talking about stoplights?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
There is a pedestrian crossing there, marked there. It's just impossible for anybody to cross as it is now. Do you anticipate that will be a safer option with the stoplights?
Yes, there'll be a stop control. Yes, there will be a stop control there.
I live in the area, and one of my biggest concerns is that section of road from Jones Sausage Road all the way to Creech Road is a speedway. People seem to, when they get in sight of the Creech Road stoplight, they floor it to see if they can get through it before it changes again. So a stoplight at New Rand Road will certainly be welcome. But I'm concerned about the volume of traffic increase there. Also on Creech Road, where it looks like it's coming out, the collector street's coming out on Creech Road is not too far from where the road starts to curve significantly. I am concerned about people being careful and driving safely there and not taking into account the topography that is less than ideal.
Understood.
Okay. Mr. Dellinger, did I get back to you yet?
You've not.
Okay, now's the time.
There's just a question. It came in under the old UDO, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
There's can you delineate out on this site plan where the 25% gross land area that is common recreation and usable open space?
I wish my land planning consultant was here for that, but all of the open space that we have is, so when you look at this map, it's the legends cut off on the bottom there a little bit, but on the starting from the west, you'll have a retail component in the red buildings. We're proposing a little bit of open space there in the retail area, and then the larger buildings are the apartment areas, and then within the townhome communities, we have 3 large open space areas, and then in between the two, we'll call it 2 pods of townhomes, there's hard to render a guess, but maybe a 300 to 400 wide swath of open space that'll be connecting the open space between Jurgen Park and heading over to Creech Road Elementary School. So that will be all wooded open space in there, and then the 3 open space areas will be managed. A lot of open lawn, some dog parks, playground, maybe some fire pits.
I want to make sure when it comes to us that there is a real diligent calculation of that, because the PD is very specific about common recreation and usable open space is the way it's worded. So usable is important. And then the definition later in section 8.4 kind of delineates that there are certain areas that can't be considered. And so I just want to make sure when staff is looking that there's the adequate amount of usable recreation and open space.
You go to the pedestrian slide. So I do know, again, I've been relying on our, go to the next one. Or, yeah, there you go. Yeah, keep going. When it comes time to the zoning, Mr. Dillinger, McAdams will be here, and I know that there has been, from when we first submitted this project back in June, received comments from your planning director. Those calculations and were all vetted very well. The purpose of showing this slide here is the dashed line in pink are all the multi-use paths that are 10 feet wide along the collector road, the local road, and then also an east-west road, east-west path connecting the parking lot there at Garner Recreational Park. In the open space area that remains all wooded, the tannish colors, that's a combination of existing trails that are there, and then also additional trails that we're going to propose. And then the green line going around that one pond is a trail as well. So there is a considerable amount of pedestrian connectivity through this park.
It's a little deceptive because your stormwater areas are not considered part of the open space. And so if you remove those elements, it's very questionable if you're hitting the 25% of the gross area. So I really think we need to look hard at that. I do have other comments, but I think they're more appropriate for a closed session based on some of the ideas related that they're permissible related to real estate. But I don't have any other public comments at this time.
Okay, Ms. Behringer.
There's the concrete plant on Garner Road. Have you had conversations with them, and how do you expect to work with the existence of that facility?
I have not had conversations with them. I understand the town has had conversations with them, and we're hoping. Mr. Hodges, do you have any comments?
We haven't had recent conversations, but we have not observed active use of that facility for some time. So we don't know the long-range plan, but unless others have observed it when we have not, but the manager and I have both been keeping an eye on that. So it's been some time now since there's been any active use, but we've not had a recent update on the long-range plan.
That's
We are hopeful. We are also hopeful that that property could be repurposed in some other way.
Okay, Mr. Vance, well,
No questions at this time.
okay, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, just a quick question, I guess, maybe for our attorney, maybe for you as well. So the restrictions related to the property that we own, what are some of the other restrictions on changing the use and doing non-park related activities on that land?
So you're referring to Garner Recreation Park?
Yeah.
Okay. So any change from its use as a park, which includes construction of a road, requires essentially that we acquire an equivalent parkland by tax value, by appraised value. And ideally, that would be adjacent to an existing park, because the acreage that's going to, would not lend itself to buying that acreage somewhere else. So there may be some dedication of land off of this project to either adjacent to Garner Recreation Park, Jurgen Park, or potentially the school system. We'd have to explore that with what's going to be allowed under, it's called a conversion of a use. So there are requirements that we're aware of that we're going to have to look at and propose to the state. They'll review that and then let us know. Now, interestingly enough, the age of this grant, there's not a recorded easement on the property, on the Garner Recreation Park property, but they'll probably require that as part of approving the conversion so that that entire parcel will come under another easement. But it would be the same if we tried to repurpose it, put an office building in instead of a park. We would have to go through the same process.
Yeah, thank you.
Bill, anything from you there?
I'm just excited about the stoplight down there. You're going to put, I know Ms. Behringer is also, that's a major issue. That'll help tremendously.
Yeah, no, we're understandably, I've been down here several times and seen it, and, what is very helpful is, John paved the way, or Mr. Hodges paved the way with the railroad, and they've acknowledged that they will allow it. As you can imagine, dealing with anything with a road, it'll take it's going to take a little while to work through their process.
Absolutely.
But they've given the green light. We have a bunch of survey we've already done. We've, based on their comments, we're acquiring some additional survey as well. So, you're welcome.
Mr. Mayor, one question. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah,
One question in reference to the intersection and pedestrian crossing. Will it be pedestrian control crossing there? Will they push the button to be able to cross?
So it is not a requirement, but I've talked to our traffic engineer, who's saying that it's probably the appropriate thing to add pedestrian crossing at that intersection.
Okay.
So yes, you will be able to push a button to get across Garner Road.
Anything else? You okay?
I touched on this in our first agenda item, and I'll mention it here. We talk about these, the pocket parks that you have. Don't overthink it. Just make it open space. I'm not joking. Just benches, sure. Playground on one of them, fine, but don't put a bunch of circles in the middle of it and flowers in the middle of it. Just leave the space for the kids to play. Again, I see it with my own eyes. They just want a place you can go out there and play and run. I mean, what's proposed, 1,000 units, that can be a lot of kids. And the project I'm talking about was just 200 townhomes.
Yeah.
And I know they're out there all the time. And this is 5 times that. Just, all this stuff looks nice in the pictures. Don't overthink it. Just make lawn space with benches.
Big field and save you money.
Benches save you money. And no, you need a playground or playgrounds in the corners, but leave just space for them to play, because the one that's so long and so narrow, the one that's a pocket park, 1.25 acres.
Play some flag football on that.
That's what you need to leave it for, is some narrow, big field. I'm just saying this, if you're going to make a proposal like this is what I heard from people. There were some people that moved in another part of town off New Bethel Road, and they liked it there, but they moved because there was no place for their kids to play. And so, we're planning parks like Jurgen Park, but it takes time and money. Okay, I just want to get that out there, just make it simple.
Agreed.
To keep it simply simple is a strong consideration.
Let me check one more time, if you will.
Yeah, no problem.
Down here. Mr. Vance, Ms. Behringer.
Do you anticipate needing right-of-way from any of the property owners on Garner Road there as we head west past the property in question?
I do not know the answer to that question yet. As I indicated, we probably by the end of July, we'll have a first draft by our traffic engineer with the widening.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I do.
Go ahead.
So the TIA has been performed on this project, I'm assuming?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, and that'll be presented at the rezoning, at a hearing, the rezoning hearing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The concern is this: improvements along Garner Road are great. A big issue will be Jones Sausage Road, which is, the town's working on. It's a project.
They're doing improvements at the intersection.
Yeah,
Yep.
and if and when that will get done, and I don't say that jokingly, I say it, the cost is increasing now to $20 million. I mean, it may get to the point where we don't know if and when, and if we do get a grant, then that's other standards apply. It'll take years and years. That's the concern, is if this proposal moves forward, if it got approved, and all that extra traffic out there is turning left even on Jones Sausage Road. It's already making a tough situation even worse. That's the concern I have is people say, build the roads first and then build the development. Well, that's the perfect example of being true because the issues that are already exist out there. 40 being, some of the work on 40 has helped, but there's still, I mean, I drive up that way on purpose to see what the traffic's like, and it's still an issue. I just, you know, again, this is, people would say you're putting the cart before the horse because Jones Sausage Road, we don't know when it will be completed. And this project, if it moves forward and so forth, I don't know what your timeline is, but it's going to take several years, I would assume, to build this out.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I just want to get that out there about the concern of, we'll see the TIA, and that'll show us some of the expected left turn movements in the morning and the afternoon.
Yeah, not to foreshadow too much, we are required to do a turn lane at that intersection as well. In talking with your town engineer, we've talked about how to coordinate that and whether we do a payment in lieu of. You know, the idea was town's going to be doing that improvement, so that is has been a discussion there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Shuck. We appreciate it. I'm sorry. Got one more.
Stay as long as you want.
To your in reference to the concerns that were brought up pertaining to Creech Road and the connector road coming into Creech Road about the curb being there, what type of precautions are being taken to ensure that the site distance is proper for that curve there?
Sure. So as part of getting the additional survey, our engineers will do what's called a site distance study to make sure that for the design speed, the vertical curves, the round curves, that proper site distance is met for making the appropriate turns. So until that design gets done, it's impossible for me to speak to that. But it'll be a requirement that our design engineers follow, and then when plans are submitted to the North Carolina Department of Transportation, you know, that all those requirements will be met as well.
And is a traffic light warranted at that connector road?
No, sir.
Not one. Okay. All right. That's all I have.
Okay, I believe
You have
we're
any
going to
questions?
let you sit down. No, I'll leave it to the council on this one.
I did want his observation, and it's not really a question. Concern about the route of the center road, because it's right to be used as a cut through in either direction, and for it to kind of come right in between the neighborhood and those homes, it kind of it splits it in half, and so it makes it less walkable for people in the neighborhood. Because if you're coming down Creech Road, but you got to go over there, you're going to cut through here. This is a nice little curve road. Get a little light at the end. If you're going on Garner Road and you want to hop up, not wait at the light up there at Creech Road, you're going to, I'm going to take this right turn and go through this neighborhood. And it's the size and scale of a road to not want to do overly burdensome traffic calming, but there might be a way to reconfigure that road so that it's on the other side of those properties. So it's going on the outside of, it keeps all of the neighborhood on one side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand your.
I know you don't want to change it.
Yeah, so again, this gets more into the zoning, but your town staff asked for a certain section, roadway section, to be built through there. It's a major collector section.
Yes.
That section was a 3-lane road all the way through with bike lanes on either side, and I have a problem of we sometimes in this country overbuild things. So we've had a few conversations with your staff about let's try to pull that in. Let's put in left turn lanes where they're appropriate, but let's not do a continuous 3-lane section all the way through. And then we removed the bike lanes, but we replaced that with a multi-use path on the side. So trying again to narrow the road so that for people to cross, you're not crossing. I think the cross section, it was like 59 feet of asphalt. But now it'll be, 2 11-foot lanes. And then we're at the one main intersection, there'll be a left turn lane. But other than that, the The collector road does meet all of the minimum radii standards that your your street manual requires. But yeah, I'm hoping it doesn't become a raceway through there.
The narrower you make it, the less likely
Yeah,
that is.
and that was the intent. So yes, it's less cost to us build, but it's also less infrastructure for the town to maintain. And we have a lot of alley-loaded townhomes here, so there's not a lot of intersections along there as well.
Okay, Mr. Attorney, we're back to you now. For any final comments or?
Just, if you have additional comments, provide them tonight or email them to me and I'll distribute them around. But yes, if council's okay with it, we would be coming back to you at the July 18th meeting, likely.
I do have one more question. It's just because I'm curious. The parking structure that is shown, is a parking structure, I'm assuming a parking structure is a parking deck. I don't know, I mean, this is a parking structure, is that what it is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 2-story, 3-story, just curious.
Likely will be a 2-story. Our zoning document allows for either up to 4 or 5, just for the flexibility of the request. But in this plan, it's envisioned as just a 2-story.
Thank you. Meant to ask that earlier, sorry.
Not a problem.
Okay, thank you much. Is that everything? Yeah, okay. I want to thank you for the cooperative effort that's going on now to hopefully get us to this development project. So we'll look forward to hearing further before long. Thank you. Okay. Okay, council, we don't have too much left, but it is time for probably 8 p.m. Recess. So let's take about a 10-minute recess and come back and complete our business here, okay? Declare 10-minute recess. We'll continue now with the remainder of our agenda. And we are now at the section under managers' reports. So, Mr. Manager, I recognize you, sir.
All right. Mayor, Town Council, I just wanted to mention a handful of things. First is the pending agenda report that's in your agenda book or your laptops there. And you'll see the schedule that's laid out for July. And just notice that, we do not have a meeting as we typically would, the first meeting in July. So our first meeting in July would be July the 18th, be our first regular meeting. And then I wanted to mention a few events that we have coming up in July. First of all is July the 3rd, which is on Monday, starting at 5 o'clock. Doors will open. The parking lot will open for our July 3rd Independence Day celebration. And we will have the symphony. We'll also have C.J. Baker Band, the play area. Forgot what it's typically called, but play zone.
Kids Zone.
Kids Zone. And we'll have vendors, some food trucks and vendors and those type of things. So, and of course the fireworks. So a host of activities there. Hopefully we'll have a big crowd. Also in July, we will have our Downtown Sound series starting, and that will be behind the GPAC. We have on July the 13th, the Phoebe's Band, starting at 6:30. And then on July the 27th at 6:30, the Show Diggers Band. And like I said, the GPAC back lawn. And then we will have on July the 21st, the Food Truck Rodeo on Main Street, and that's from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. So, and that's the end of my report.
Okay, thanks, sir. Any questions for the town manager on the information he shared? All right, thank you. We'll go to council reports at this time, and I'm going to start with Mr. Vance.
I have no report. Have nothing to report
Okay,
tonight.
all right, thank you. Mr. Dellinger.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Behringer.
Nothing this evening.
Mr. Singleton.
Sir, just apologize for being late due to work, and surprised I got here at 6:30.
Well, thank you for your notification. We appreciate that. Sure enough.
Nothing, sir.
Okay. And nothing specific from the mayor, other than to just basically second what the manager has said. There, obviously, our big event is July 3rd, and I encourage all of our citizens to come out and partake of that. It's going to be a great event, and other items that are going on in July are good events to attend as well. So your town is providing any number of entertainment and other events that hopefully our town will enjoy. I believe there is, Mr. Dellinger wants to ask for a closed session, so I'm going to recognize him at this time.
Of the citation. Do you have the citation, Gray or Terry?
I can provide it.
Mr. Jones does.
My understanding is that you'd be requesting a closed session to discuss negotiating positions with respect to proposed acquisition of real estate. That would be under North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A5.
Make that motion.
Second.
Okay, motion, council, is properly before you with a second. If you're in favor of the motion, would you vote aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, yeah, if you're opposed, no, and there is no opposition. So I don't believe there's, well, we've already voted to go into closed session, so there's no other business to take place before that. So I'm going to declare that we are now in closed session. Should we retire to our closed session room?
That would be my
The council is back into open session, having gone into a closed session. And I'm going to ask our town attorney if she will just summarize the essence of our closed session.
Town council met with the town attorney and the manager's office staff in closed session to instruct staff on negotiating material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease. Council did not meet in closed session for economic development purposes as was listed in the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. So by my calculation, that concludes the items on our agenda for this evening. So does anybody have anything for the good of the cause before we adjourn? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, motion properly made and seconded. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
And it is unanimous. I declare this meeting of the Garner Town Council work session to be concluded. Thank you all.